The last few years has represented a breakthrough, I
Yeah,
believe, in mental health
yeah.
from the effects of the pandemic, really forcing people to talk about mental health
Mhm.
to people like Simone Biles, talk about a heroic
Right,
Houstonian.
right.
I can't tell you how I was overjoyed that she pulled out at the Olympics because she needed to protect herself, because she
Mhm,
recognized the tremendous impact it had on our mental health. And that is a heroic action because there was
mhm.
so much pressure on her to not put herself first.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Spotlight Houston, where we bring you the best of the people, places, and events in Houston. Today, we take a look at the Jung Center and their programs and services. We sat down for a conversation with Sean Fitzpatrick, the executive director of the Jung Center and the Mind Body Spirit Institute. And now, your host, Blanca Quesada.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the show. Hey, have you ever stopped to think about how you're living your life? I do sometimes, but maybe not as often as I should. I found out that according to Carl Jung, a Swiss analytical psychiatrist, author, and just did all kinds of things, interesting things, he said that most of our being happens unconsciously. And he says that we can engage with our unconscious through various means, such as dreams, symptoms, and daily patterns.
Yeah.
And this encounter leads to successful relationships, creativity, and a sense of purpose. This teaching made sense to me, right? Because how many times are we just experiencing life as it comes? We don't think about it. We just do things at work, with family, with friends, and just it's just an automatic thing, and we really don't think about what we're actually doing. So, without looking inward and seeing how we truly want to feel and knowing that we have the power to make choices and create our best life ever, and we can do that anytime we want. It doesn't matter how old you are. You can be super young or you can be who knows. And you're able to make these changes anytime. I found out that there's a very special place here in Houston and that it can teach us how to start this new journey and achieve and enjoy a better life. And I got really excited. I have invited Sean Fitzpatrick. He's the executive director of the Jung Center Mind and Body Spirit Institute. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me, Blanca.
Yeah, I couldn't wait to talk to you and meet you because I wanted to hear how we can begin changing our lives for the better.
Yeah.
But before we get into all that, I'm sure that we have a lot of listeners who have no earthly idea
Sure.
who Carl Jung is.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about who he was?
You bet. So Carl Jung was a Swiss psychiatrist, as you mentioned. He was born in 1875. And he was beginning his work as a psychiatrist and as a researcher and as a theorist of psychology right at the turn of the 20th century. And he was, for a period of time, closely associated with Sigmund Freud. Freud was about 20 years older than he was. And for just a few years, the two of them worked very closely together on the developing of what then was called psychoanalysis and really was what contemporary psychotherapy grew out of the work that they were doing. I think unique among the psychiatrists and psychological theorists in that era, he was very interested in cultures that were not his. A lot of psychology was based on the experiences of white European men, mostly. And Jung was unique in that he was deeply curious and not just curious, he actually traveled and spent time with he spent time a significant period of time in Africa. He spent a significant period of time in India, also in the United States. He came to the United States and went to Santa Fe, actually went to Taos and spent time at the Taos Pueblo. And so that's one thing that Jung, I think, what was a part of the depth of his psychological theory was that he took very seriously what makes us different and also what is below the surface that we really share in common across cultures and across time. And so he was practicing as a psychotherapist, as a psychiatrist up until his death in 1961. And as it happens, we have a small, we overlapped. The organization, the Jung Center here in town, was founded in 1958. And by a group of five women. And they reached out to Dr. Jung and asked his permission to use his name in the title of our institution. And he gave us his permission. He knew about us and was supportive of the work we were doing down here in Southeast Texas.
That's great. And congratulations on having the institute in Houston for so many years. It's what,
Yeah.
over 65 years, something like that?
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's
65 years
amazing
at this
because
point.
most institutes aren't around for that long.
Yeah, and I think particularly an organization like this, we were, as I mentioned, there were five women who founded the Jung Center, and if you think about what was going on in the mid '50s, the mid and later '50s, that in and of itself was extraordinary. That they came together and they saw a real need for from their perspective, for Jung's theories and Jung's perspectives on the human being in the lives of Houstonians.
Mhm,
But more broadly, what they understood is that actually mental health is something that we can learn about and reflect on and practice skills to build our mental health in places that are not just clinical places, like not just a therapist's office, that some of this can happen in classrooms.
mhm.
And that is that we've always been a public educational institution in the sense that we serve the public.
Yeah. And thank
And yeah,
goodness that mental health is now being brought up in the
yeah,
forefront and it's not something that's hidden anymore or
right.
stigmatized anymore.
Right. I agree wholeheartedly. And of course, there's still some of that, but particularly the last few years has represented a breakthrough, I
Yeah.
believe, in mental health
Yeah.
from the effects of the pandemic, really forcing people to talk about mental health
Hmm.
to people like Simone Biles, talk about a heroic
Right.
Houstonian
Right.
I can't tell you how I was overjoyed that she pulled out at the Olympics because she needed to protect herself, because she
Mhm.
recognized the tremendous impact it had on our mental health. And that is a heroic action because there was
Mhm.
so much pressure on her to not put herself first.
So, what did Jung think about life?
He was a fan.
Yeah, I'm sure.
He was an interesting guy. His father was effectively a Lutheran minister. He was a pastor. And his mother was a spiritualist. At the beginning of the late 19th century and the early 20th century, there were a lot of in the culture, there were a lot of people who were interested in spirits and in spirituality, but maybe outside of what we would think of as a religious context. And so Jung was always he was a deeply spiritual person who was thinking outside of religious contexts. So I think one of the reasons that I believe Jungian psychology remains powerful is, and has become increasingly so as the studies, the polls show that people are less and less engaged in religious traditions. And as that happens, the fundamental needs that we have as human beings for meaning and for connection with others and for relating to the mystery of our lives, they continue to need to be met. And Jung psychology offered a way to think about that and to take seriously our needs to. You talked earlier about the unconscious, the notion of the unconscious, and that the another way of talking about the unconscious is that it represents the mystery that we are. From a psychological standpoint, we are aware of a very small percentage of the whole of our experience. And Jung and that early generation of psychologists took seriously that idea that there's most of who we are is a mystery to us. But if we pay attention and we develop our capacity for awareness, that we can deepen our relationship with that mystery in ways that can really enrich our lives and the lives of those around us.
I think you mentioned the magic word is being more aware
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
what's happening inside of us and
Yeah.
around us.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I often say, as a therapist, I'll often say that 90% of the work is awareness. And there's so many demands on our awareness now. It has increased exponentially since I was a child. So I'm 51 now. And when I was a child, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have
Right,
we
right.
didn't have email, we didn't have the World Wide Web, we didn't have
Right.
streaming television, and there's so many, and it's brought so much good into our lives, but one of the things that's been very difficult is that there's so many forces demanding our attention and turning our attention into money for them,
Mhm,
that our ability to just be present with our own experience has been really harmed, I think. And
mhm,
it's a skill, it's a muscle that we've lost. And
mhm,
that for me is the first step toward changing and improving our experience of this life is developing that muscle again, that capacity to be present with what we're feeling and thinking
mhm.
and not pulled by the million videos and the million
Yeah.
horrible news stories that are grabbing us and making us afraid, and to just bring ourselves back to this present moment and what's actually happening right now.
What was the most important teaching that you got from Jung?
Wow.
What changed your life?
Yeah, thank you for asking. For me, I encountered Jung when I was about 20, and I took a university class at the University of Houston. It was called Religion and Personality. And it was taught by a Jungian analyst and an Episcopal priest who is pretty well known among some folks here in town. His name was Pittman McGehee. He was the dean of Christ Church Cathedral downtown. And for me, I was raised Catholic, and that form of Christianity has really shaped my moral awareness and my basic understanding of what it means to be a human and lead a meaningful life and a life of integrity. But in college, I was really struggling with that. I was struggling to make sense of how I related to Christianity. And what I found in Jung was not a replacement for that, but a deepening of it. In other words, like, Jung's thought encouraged us to understand that the great wisdom traditions, the great spiritual stories, sacred stories that fill the imaginations of the world's populations and give us guidance in how to live and how to relate to the divine or to what's ultimate within us. That also at the same time, those stories were expressing timeless psychological dynamics, right? So that when I was thinking about my relationship to Christianity, I could look at Jesus and I could think about him not just as a God, as a like this metaphysical entity, but I could also think about him as a symbol of all of our experiences on this planet, each of us as individuals, as we try to hold the tension between our groundedness in our bodies and the our let's say our spiritual depths and our spiritual heights, that in Jesus's story and in the Buddha's story and in Teresa of Avila's story or in the stories or Claire or some of the other great spiritual teachers that they are talking about spiritual truth, but they're also giving us really pragmatic psychological insight. And that
Mhm.
was very helpful for me.
In order to change our lives,
Mhm.
what are some of the major lessons or programs that we can take at the Jung Center
Yeah.
to be able to do that?
So the Jung Center in a year, the Jung Center offers more than 150 events that are open to the public. Some of them are just single lectures or single conversations. We do film screenings. We have courses that are ongoing. We are organized in semesters. So we have fall, spring, and summer. We just began our spring semester. And our offerings are always changing. So one thing that we do have we have a few things that are steady, that are all perennial, that are always there. One of them is a series that we call What Matters Most. And it's a series of 6 classes. Each of the classes is about 4 weeks long. And most of our classes happen in the evenings. Some of them happen on the weekends because a lot of us work and it's hard to take a class in the middle of the day. And in those classes, we explore an element of Jungian psychology, but we do it through by really answering a question, trying to think about a question that is really important to all of us. So the class that we taught last semester, that I taught last semester, was on how can we be free? What does freedom mean? And not so much from a political standpoint, but from a psychological standpoint. And another class that we will have coming up is how can I relate to my mortality? right? So death is a fundamental truth of human life and it's woven into our experience. And
Mhm,
if we pay attention to it, if we start to think about it and notice all the places it shows up in our life, it is like we are creating a friend, right?
mhm,
Rather than an
mhm.
enemy.
Yeah.
So there are those kinds of classes, and then the other kind we have many different kinds of classes. The other perennial kinds of classes that we have are what you mentioned actually in your introduction of me. You talked about the Jung Center and our Mind Body Spirit Institute. And the Mind Body Spirit Institute, which is actually led by a friend and colleague, his name is Alejandro Chaul, that is very practice oriented. So the focus there is to improve health, reduce stress, and nourish the human spirit. And we do that
Mhm,
through both classes where you sit and learn, like maybe listen to
mhm,
lectures, but they're much more practice oriented. They're about learning how, like mindfulness practices, to, as I was saying, to come back to this present moment and to allow our experience right now to be as deep and rich as possible.
mhm.
And mindfulness practices, meditation practices, a lot of work with the body as well. And so those are all the kinds of things that are ongoing on a regular basis. Some of them are free. We have an ongoing meditation series called The Power of Community that anybody can join at any time, and many other offerings that are free.
So, Sean, do you offer any programs or classes online that are free?
We do. So another, I think, important part of the work that we do is something called the Community for Conscious Aging. And it was formed by a group of volunteers who wanted to have conversations about really meaningful things. Not that medical issues as we age aren't important, but they wanted to be thinking and talking about more than just their latest doctor's appointments
Right.
and medications and so on and so forth. So what they wanted to do was to talk about what it really means to grow old and how that can actually be a path to deeper and deeper meaning. And so we have monthly lunch and learns that the Community for Conscious Aging holds. They're always available they're hosted online. And because those are focused a little bit more on an aging population, they tend to happen at lunchtime, right? They tend to
Yeah.
happen more during the middle of the day. And many other of our offerings are offered online as well.
I think that that would be a great idea, not just for people that are beginning to age, because I think we start aging from the minute we're born. So
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
think that's something that younger people that can really understand should start thinking about.
Yeah.
And I think that it might help them understand their lives a little bit more and why
Yeah.
they should make the right choices.
Yeah. And to be informed by aging as you're making those choices when you're young. It's hard. It's just to be a 20 to be a teenager, 20 something, you feel immortal, right?
Yes, exactly, exactly.
And so it's hard to put your attention on that. Jung had a way of talking about it that I find really helpful and that has been inspiring, really inspired the founding of our organization, which is he said, we don't really have universities for the second half of life. That when we go to the university, the agenda of the university is to prepare us to become a functional member of the economy
Mhm,
and to be a part of the community that is growing and building, right? And for many of us, not all of us, but many of us, the call is and the experiences of becoming parents, right? So
mhm,
in the first half of life, we're learning how to get our job requirements and get our qualifications in so that we can be hired. And we're learning how, and our targets are maybe buying a home or finding a residence that we can live in and finding a partner and getting launched in a career. And what tends to get lost in that is meaning. What tends to get lost in that, I can't tell you how many times I've had people come into my office as a therapist and say, I was told that once I had the career and the wife and the kids, that I'd be happy, and I'm not happy.
mhm,
And that's the beginning of the work of exploring our soul and taking seriously the mystery of our existence.
mhm.
And so the Jung Center is intended in a sense to be like a university for the second half of life. And the second half of life can begin early. Like, it doesn't have to begin at 35 or 40 or 45. It can begin in childhood when you become aware of a much greater reality than the one that is immediately apparent to your eyes, and you start a relationship with that. Right? So I agree with you. Like it doesn't matter how old you are chronologically. This is something I think we're all called to, and it's wise to begin to attend to it.
Sean, how can we get into our heads and get into that awareness? And how can we actually start realizing that we have more control over our lives than we think?
Yeah. Boy, that is a big question. But I have a couple of starting places. It all for me comes back to the body and where I am right now. I believe that the very first practice is noticing what's going on in my body right now, right? One of the things I do a certain amount of work with people who have experienced trauma in their lives, and a passion of mine actually is the needs of people who are working with people who have experienced trauma and suffering. And 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 what we lose when we experience trauma and suffering often is a connection to our bodies in the present moment. Because our bodies are we have automatic systems that are meant to protect us in the case of a threat to our lives. And what often will happen is you might be familiar with the idea of fighting or fleeing or freezing when there's a threat to life, and this is what happens when there's a trauma is that we have these automatic systems in our bodies that take over and prepare us for what we need to do to survive. Well, what will happen is that we'll get stuck in those places. Our bodies never come out of those responses, and even though we're living in a time and a place where there isn't a threat, our bodies and our psyches, the whole of us, still is behaving as though there's a threat in the environment. So if we can do the simple work, it's not necessarily easy, but simple work of being still, noticing what's actually happening. My feet are in my shoes and they're happen to be right now on the floor in my office. And I notice the way that the chair feels beneath my thighs and at my lower back. And I notice I can hear the sound of my voice as I'm speaking. All of those things bring me here and not in the trauma that I've experienced and not on my to-do list or on the million terrible stories that my phone is dying to tell me about. That's the beginning. Like having the capacity to be in our bodies and notice what's actually happening.
So you become consciously aware of your present.
Yes. Yeah. To be here now. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with being disconnected, right? Making choices to not be present when what's present is actually really painful or
Mhm.
overwhelming in some way. But it's our default setting to not be present. And there's so many forces on us that keep us from being present. But developing an intentional practice of allowing ourselves to just be here now, that's the starting place.
Mhm. And that can be really difficult to do.
It can. Yeah, it can and can be and much more difficult for some people than for others.
Yeah. And
Um,
again, you have to make it a conscious decision to do that,
yes.
you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
which we
so
can make, but sometimes it's hard to for some of us, we don't live in environments that allow it. So it might actually mean leaving at least for periods of time, to a place where it is possible to do that. Maybe that's in our
mhm,
car, right? Or
mhm,
maybe that's in the sanctuary of a church that's in our neighborhood, but it may be someplace in our office or somebody else's home or just having a space
mhm,
where I'm not going to have people come and interrupt me or I'm not going to have the thousand demands, right?
mhm,
Come blowing in the
mhm.
door. Yeah.
So I think that maybe we should go in and check out your website and to see what all you're offering, to
Yeah.
see where can we begin and what we can learn to have better lives.
We would love to have you. And for your listeners, our website is junghouston.org. That's Jung Houston.org. And there's so many places to start. And even if it's just dropping by our building in the museum district, the building was constructed as a gallery and we maintain it as a gallery. We're a founding member of the Museum District Association. And actually, we're rebranding. We're calling ourselves the Houston Museum District now.
Yeah.
And so you can actually come to a physical location, but you can also do so much online. We have, as you've discussed, like we have a lot of classes and lectures and conversations that are going on online. You can be a part of be a part of our experience there too.
Yeah. I think we should all check it out, including me.
Good.
We
Yeah, we
need
would
to
love to
check it
have
out.
you. We would love that.
Because we all need a little bit of change every now and then and become more aware of ourselves, like you were mentioning. And what's a phone number? Do you have a good phone number where we can call?
You bet. 713-524-8253
Yeah.
at the Jung Center. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And you have a great benefit coming up in February. Can you
Yeah.
tell us just a little bit about that?
Yes, we would love to have people attend that. It is so we have an annual spring benefit dinner, and it is again being held at the River Oaks Country Club. And this year's called Hope Begins in the Dark. And that's a
Mm.
statement from the great writer Anne Lamott. So Anne Lamott is maybe familiar to people who are Christian. She's known as a Christian writer, but she's one that speaks very honestly about her experience in her life in ways that I think a lot of people who are familiar with Christian literature might be surprised by. And she's also very well regarded among writers. She wrote a book called Bird by Bird, Writing Bird by Bird, and that has influenced so many best-selling writers and actually comedians love her too. So she's going to be coming and speaking at the event, and you can learn more about that on our website too at younghouston.org. You can on the front page. There's a link.
And that's February 27th, right?
February 27th. Yes,
Great. And of course, we can check it out on the website or we can call and ask for more information.
absolutely, absolutely. We'd love to hear
Yeah.
from.
Yeah. And what about volunteers? Do you have volunteers that come and help out at the center?
We're just beginning the COVID, as with so much in our world, COVID disrupted a lot of that, and so we're just beginning to talk seriously about integrating volunteers more in our work. Volunteers are essential to what we do. They serve on committees, and the Jung Center is a nonprofit organization. And for listeners who maybe aren't as familiar with nonprofits, we depend on people willing to serve on our committees that oversee our art gallery and our finances and the way we serve our mission and how we raise money and our advisors to the Mind Body Spirit Institute and the Community for Conscious Aging. And so that's mostly where our volunteers show up now is in helping us plan and lead. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, if you want to volunteer, just visit the website or make a call, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Just reach out.
Sean, thank you so much for joining me today and for letting us know that there is a place that can help us navigate life's challenges
Yeah.
in a different way and in other transitions in a very healthy way.
Thank you so much for having me. I believe strongly it's amplified during the pandemic that we need more conversations about mental health, and we need then the most important aspect of it, aside from becoming present, is connecting with other people. Isolation is the enemy of mental health, which we really learned during the pandemic, and so we understand ourselves to be a place for people to connect and to deepen relationships with other people who are walking similar paths to
Mhm.
us and to not feel and to access really the insights of mental health without necessarily needing to walk into a clinician's office, right? A therapist's office.
Yeah.
That may be useful and helpful for people. And I'm a clinician and I believe in it, but that's not the only way to be addressing our mental.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you for everything that you've let us know.
You bet.
And of course, thank you all for joining me as well. Please send me your comments. And if you have any story ideas, please send them my way. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Spotlight Houston, a production of Story Zone Media.